Okay, good evening everyone. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear to you through the magic of the internet this evening. My name's Tony, I'm the host for this webinar and in fact a whole series of webinars that we're going to be running every week for the next 7 weeks, all about managing children's behaviour, and particularly we're going to be getting down to what to do about tantrums. So I hope that's what you're here for. If you're not, you might be disappointed. Now, have a look at your screen at the moment. You should see a few things depending on what sort of device you're joining me on and what sort of internet connection you have. In particular, you might see me towards the right side of your screen coming through on video. I hope that looks clear. It doesn't always work perfectly depending on what sort of bandwidth you've got, but I hope at least the audio comes through. If it's not going so great, in a minute I'm going to turn off my video. You won't be looking at my head the whole time, and that sometimes helps the quality of the audio. So, we're here to talk about tantrums, aren't we? I hope you've had a good Tuesday, by the way, and you've done whatever you need to do with whatever kids you might have around and managed to carve out a bit of time for yourself to concentrate on what we're talking about. I know that's easier said than done, but I really encourage you to do that. It's very hard to multitask for this kind of thing, and we've tried to make this presentation really interactive. So I'm hoping you'll be able to participate in an active kind of way. So let me tell you a bit more about this webinar and what we'll be talking about. So first of all, if you've never participated in a webinar, this is what it looks like. You're there now, you're doing it. It's basically like if you've watched something on YouTube, it's similar to that with some main differences. One, it's live, so it's going to be a bit less polished, folks. You're going to hear all my ums and ahs and stumbles and checking where I'm up to, and because I can't do another take. But the advantage is that it's somewhat interactive. It's not as interactive as if we were face-to-face, but you might have noticed there's a pretty active chat box if you're on a computer, which is in the bottom left over that way somewhere. Now, if you're on a phone or a tablet, it may not show up for you. There is some limited functionality on those devices. You do get the best experience through a laptop or computer. So I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you'll still get my voice and the images that I want to share with you to explain what we're dealing with. Now, because it's live, everyone else here is also a live person. There's no pre-recordings or robots or anything chat. So just bear that in mind. Feel free to chat with each other, share your own ideas. We want to keep it fairly informal, but also just bear in mind that each person's a real person with real feelings. And this can be a sensitive kind of topic. So just be thoughtful in the kind of comments that you make about other people in particular. Now, you might have noticed we have joining us tonight a facilitator whose name is Derek. Part of his name seems to have gotten chopped off. It was supposed to say Derek and facilitator in brackets. I think you'll just get Derek with an open bracket and not the rest of it. So Derek's our facilitator. He works with me here at the Parenting Research Centre, and he'll be kind of helping you in chat, giving you some guidance, keeping track of questions, that kind of thing. So feel free to interact with Derek as well. Now, the topic that we're going to be dealing with is tantrums, which is quite a big topic, okay? What we're doing tonight is a kind of an introduction and an overview of a really strong approach to dealing with tantrums. Now, I don't want it to be just an overview because I think that might be frustrating for you. So what we've done is included some actionable tips. So there's 5 practical tips that we think you could start using straight away. And you'll also get an idea of what you're in for with the rest of the course, because the future sessions will build on what we talk about tonight. I hope that suits you. We've done a lot of work to kind of try and condense this down into a manageable format. But just to let you know, we've traditionally delivered this in a face-to-face program that takes maybe 12 or even 15 hours. So there's a lot of content to squeeze down. So bear with us. I hope we've got the kind of pacing and level of detail right for you. Now, it is the first in the course, so I hope you are prepared to try and come back. To get the full effect, you really do need to commit to multiple sessions. I'm sorry, it's very hard for me to do too much for you in 40 minutes. So it is quite condensed. I'm going to be moving quite quickly. After I get this little intro over with, we're going to be motoring along quite quickly. But then we'll slow down for some questions at the end. All right, so if you have any questions about that, feel free to fire them off. Derek might be able to help you with them. I'll provide more clarity about what we're doing as we go along. Before I go any further, I'd just like to do a few acknowledgements. First of all, to the to the Victorian government who's provided funding for this project. That's why we're able to bring it to you at no charge, because we really want to increase parents' access to evidence-based parenting support. That's what we're all about at Raising Children Network and the Parenting Research Centre. So they've very generously supported this, and we're able to bring it for free to other parents from other states as well, just because it doesn't cost us anything extra to allow people from all over the world really to access these webinars. So the second acknowledgement I'd like to make is to the traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting on tonight. Now, of course, we're spread all over the place, so that might be different people, different traditional owners for all of us. For me here in Melbourne, that's the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. If you know who the traditional owners are where you're located, feel free to share that in chat. That might be really interesting for people to hear about. All right, let's crack on and get stuck into this content right after I tell you who I am, because you're probably wondering who this guy talking to you is. My name's Tony Gates. I'm a psychologist by trade, and my particular area of expertise is in working with children and families on education and development. And I've worked in a range of settings, including schools, private practice, consultation, doing all sorts of things like assessment, counseling, interventions, that kind of thing. And I'm also a parent myself. I've got a 7 or nearly 8-year-old son. So that's a little bit about me. I won't bore you with too much more. You can look up on Raising Children Network. This might look familiar to you. I'm just going to turn off my camera now so you can see this a little bit better. Don't bother trying to read this. Just trying to set the scene that this is brought to you by Raising Children Network. And you can read more about the webinar presenters if you really want to on the website. And if you do get concerned or upset during the webinar, that's possible. We're talking about fairly sensitive issues and ones that can cause a lot of stress. Don't feel bad if you need to disconnect. That's fine, but I also encourage you to seek further support if you're feeling distressed. There are some ideas for that on Raising Children Network on the website, which you're probably mostly familiar with, and given that Raising Children Network is hosting this. You could try Parent Line in your state. You'll need to look that up because there's a different number in each state, as I understand it. Lifeline is a great free counselling service. You can call that number from anywhere in Australia and talk to someone live. Raising Children Network also has a section on hotlines where you can find more numbers to call. So there's no shame in that if you feel like you need further support. Or of course, see a psychologist or a child behaviour expert for your own individualised support. Now let's talk a little bit about the course itself, just to set the scene. So tonight is kind of our first step in the journey towards dealing with tantrums. There's a lot more that we're going to offer you after that, okay? And I'm going to go through that just a little bit now so you know what to expect. So here's tantrums. I chose this kind of spooky font just because I thought that tantrums sometimes have that effect on us, don't they? Level 1 is where we're at tonight. I hope you can see that. Don't worry if you can't read it. I'm just going to explain it to you quickly. Level 1, session 1, we're going to talk about why tantrums happen and some ideas for what you can do about it. Then so it's a standalone session. You'll get a complete overview tonight. Then we will move on to level 2. It has 3 sessions, as you can see here. They're numbered sessions 2, 3, and 4. So we'll be launching into session 2 again, same time next week. So we'll look at your child's environment in session 2. We'll look at tracking and targeting particular behaviours in session 3. And we'll look at responding to your child's behaviour in session 4. So that's a discrete level. That's all you can do. Okay, fair enough. But see if you can make it to level 3, which looks like this. So there'll be sessions 5, 6, and 7, and we'll be going to even more detail there. So level 3 is really where you'll get much more chance to interact with me, to get kind of more feedback on how you're going. And you'll also have at least a few weeks by then of experience of trying to do this. So we'll have more to talk about how it's going for you. I just got a comment in chat about what you should be able to see at the moment. You shouldn't be able to see me talk, my face or Derek's face. You should just see a picture on the screen, but hopefully my voice is coming through. All right, now on to tonight's content. Now I've broken this down to try and make it easy to keep track of. Like I said, we're going to move pretty fast, but hopefully you'll pick up some of it and at least know what you want to know more about. So to start off with, there's the first of 6 things that we want to cover is how you might work out the purpose of the behavior or the function of the behavior. We're going to be using an approach called functional assessment, which you might have heard of. And a key step there is to try and get a sense of why is this happening. And I think that's really valuable for parents and it'll be quite empowering. Secondly, we're going to talk just briefly about how to give effective instructions. And a lot of you might have good ideas about this already. Third, we're going to talk about how to use consequences for behavior. Now, this is not just kind of like consequences in that threatening kind of looming negative consequences way. It's also consequences in that threatening kind of looming negative consequences way. It's also about positive consequences, and that is actually the key part of this approach that we're going to be talking about. It's about encouraging positive behavior to replace the negative behavior. Step number 4, we're going to talk about how you can deal with things in the long term. So I'm sorry, this is not a quick fix solution. That is also its strength though. You might have guessed by now that there are no quick fixes for difficult behavior like tantrums. You do need an approach that is consistent over time. And that's really where the strength of this approach comes in. Fifth, we're going to talk about how to teach your child new skills to help them get what they want. And finally, we'll talk briefly about how to use rules and how to set them up effectively. Hope that suits everyone. Feel free to comment on that if you like in chat and we'll gather that feedback. So let's get rid of, oh, well, hang on. Before we do that, I got a bit ahead of myself. We're going to have a little poll, all right? So this is a chance for you to interact. We're not going to do too much interaction tonight because I really want to get through this content. But in a minute on your screen, if you're on a computer, you should see, hang on, don't answer just yet. Everyone's jumping the gun a little bit. So right now you should see on your screen a multiple choice poll. You can click your answer and press submit at the bottom. This is just a fun way to get you engaged with us. Now, if you're on a mobile or a tablet, it may not show up. It's a bit hit and miss, and I'm sorry about that. But if you're on a computer, hopefully it's showing up. You can click a response, and you might be able to see everyone else's responses kind of in aggregate showing up at the same time. I don't know if you can see that yet. We've got a bulk of people around 2 or 3 years old that the child they're most concerned about is. I'll stop that poll now and close it. I hope that showed up for people. Thank you for participating in that, by the way. Got a really good response rate. So you're all really on the ball. Thank you. Let's keep moving because I know everyone's got things they want to get on with. So we talked about these 6 things we're going to cover. Let's crack on with number 1, which is working out the purpose. Now, as we go through, I'm going to stick these little tabs over on the side of the screen so you can keep track of where we're up to. It's just to kind of help your memory and keep track of following along. So let's get on to talking about the purpose. And part of that, we just need to discuss a little bit about tantrums. I'm not going to bore you with a whole lot of background information from psychology, but just to set the scene. First of all, tantrums are very common. So if your child is having tantrums, don't feel like there's something wrong with them. it's very common and it's almost unusual to have a child who's never had a tantrum. So they're very common, especially in under 4s, but they can continue in older children and particularly in children who have additional needs. So if you've got a child with intellectual disability, an autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, all sorts of learning difficulties, they can contribute to an increased risk, an increased likelihood and even intensity of tantrums. That's not unusual. And it can mean those tantrums persist to an older age group as well. Also, tantrums can vary enormously from child to child. And if you've been around other kids, you might have noticed this, but you might also not have noticed it. That's really important that you understand that the child, the tantrum that Isabella's child has might be completely different to the tantrum that Kelly's child has. And we need to pay attention to those differences because they can be really useful for us to understand. Finally, there are a variety of things that contribute to why tantrums happen. Session 2 will tell you a lot more about that. Some of them are fixed. They're to do with genetics and just the way your child is put together. Some of them are to do with your child's environment, and that's where we have an opportunity to really get in and make make a difference. The other thing about tantrums, which I may not need to tell you, is they can be really stressful. They can drive parents nuts, okay? And that's an important factor. Your own stress levels are relevant. It doesn't mean that you're failing or something if you're getting really stressed about tantrums and don't always respond the way you want to. So just be kind to yourself, and in later sessions we will talk, particularly in level 3, we'll talk about managing yourself and helping yourself stay calm or respond in the way that you'd like to. All right, now I'm going to take you through a way of working out what the purpose is of the tantrum or what the function is. First thing we need to do is look at what else is going on at the time. So think about, try and right now form an image in your mind of your child having a tantrum. Where are they? What's going on? Try and form a picture in your mind because we want to start extracting some of the details from this and looking for patterns. Here's a little picture I'm going to use to illustrate. Now you might notice there's not a tantrum in this picture, and that's on purpose. It's to get you thinking about the broader context, not just the tantrum itself. So what we're going to do is have a look here and see what we can notice about the detail in this picture. And there's a few things I want you to look for in particular. So to start off with, we want to think about where is the tantrum happening, or where is this, in this case, where is this scene set? Feel free to comment with your own ideas. To me, it looks like it's on some sort of suburban street. There's some trees around and it's on the road. Then we would move on to who is involved. Now, if you look at this scene, you should see 3 people. There's what looks like, I'm going to try and illustrate some of this stuff for you. I don't think it's going to want to cooperate. No, that's okay. So there's 3 people that I can see. On the left-hand side, we have a young girl. On the right-hand side of her, we have a young boy riding a bike. And on the right-hand side of him, we have what looks to be the mum, probably of both kids. That's a bit of a guess, but that's okay. We can guess. If you can't see the picture, just listen to me describe it, and that should help. And visualize your own scene with your child. So once you've thought about who's involved, next, think about what's going on at the time. So here I'd say, looks like the boy's riding a bike, the girl's riding a skateboard, the mum's kind of helping the boy on the bike. And next, think about when it is. This is important here because we're not really sure, are we? It looks like it could be maybe sometime in the morning, perhaps more likely early afternoon or mid-afternoon coming home from school. That's really important, the timing of this. And you can already might have ideas coming to your mind about how that influences things. Maybe the kids are tired after a long day of school, or maybe they're particularly excited to see mum. Maybe the boy's just learning to ride his bike and this is the first time he's ridden at home after school. All these things are relevant when we're thinking about, all right, how did a tantrum eventuate in this situation? So you could guess, suppose a tantrum came next. Maybe it would be the boy that had it, maybe it would be the girl. You can already start to form ideas in your mind about why either of them might have had a tantrum. I can see some of you have already come up with some great suggestions in chat, which is really exciting. Thank you so much for your comments. I won't go through them all at this stage because I want to keep moving. All right, so just to recap those questions again, 4 of them. Where were you? Who was there? What were you doing at the time? When was it? So that's what time of day. You want to do that for at least one behavior kind of in your head right now while I'm talking, but you're also going to want to do that for each tantrum that happens, okay? So there's some work that goes in here, and in session 2 we'll take you through tracking behavior, making a list, and looking for patterns. And this brings us to our first practical tip, folks. Each time there's a practical tip, it's going to look pretty much like this with the boy scratching his head. Here's what I think you should do. Write a list of situations where tantrums happen. So think about all the situations you can remember: grocery shopping, going to grandma's house, playing with brother or sister, and each time it happens you want to keep track of it. Second, once you've got an idea of each of those different situations, have a think about when's it worse. Maybe give it a star rating out of 5. When does your child have their 5-star tantrums just versus maybe a 2 or 3-star tantrum? And then start to look for patterns. Maybe a bunch of these situations involve something to do with getting dressed, or maybe they involve transitioning between activities. Maybe they involve a sibling being present. Maybe they involve taking medication. Maybe they involve visiting specialist appointments. There's a whole lot of possibilities, and you're going to need to look at your own data to work that out. And that's what we'll guide you through in future sessions. Particularly session 2 will have an opportunity to do a bit more of that. Next, we've got to have a think about the results of the tantrum. What happens next? What does the tantrum do to the child's environment? 2 things in particular to think about. People. How do people react? The people around them, including you. Second, what is your child doing 5 minutes later? So the effect on what activities are going on. All right, so bear that in mind. 2 main categories of impacts of a tantrum: how people react and what they're doing shortly after the tantrum stops. Now, we're going to put all that together. This is where functional assessment kind of comes into its own. And we're going to have a guess at what we think the purpose is. All right, now you won't know at this stage. It is just a guess. It's not like you can deduce it and say, I've worked it out, I'm 100% sure. So give yourself permission to guess. You're not going to do too much harm if you get it a bit wrong. You'll have a chance to adjust as you go along. So you want to start forming a guess, but also don't be fooled by how behavior looks at first glance. Sometimes it can look like it's aimed at one thing, but there's actually something else going on underneath. I'll tell you more about that in a second, and also other sessions will go into that in more detail. But also bear in mind, a word or a comment on this word purpose from me, we don't mean that your child is doing it on purpose. That's really important. We're not saying your child is kind of deliberately malicious in this behavior. Purpose just means function. How is that tantrum working in the child's world? Hope that clarifies that. Hope I'm coming through loud and clear. It looks like everyone's commenting and following along okay, so that's really encouraging. Thanks, folks. All right, so what are some of the purposes that you might want to think about? I want to give you some suggestions to get you thinking, okay? Now, using the functional assessment approach that we apply in this course, there are just 6 categories that you need to consider, all right? And they're divided into 2. On the one side, it might be to get something. On the other hand, it might be to escape something, all right? We'll go through these one by one. First of all, have a think about attention. This is a big one, folks, and I've seen some people bringing this up in chat already. You're on the ball, folks, that's good. So think about, is the tantrum having the function of getting your child attention? Does that seem like a likely purpose to you? Or is it escaping attention? That can be a big one, particularly in kids with additional needs. If you have a child with an autism spectrum disorder, they might be have a reaction to getting attention from, say, the class teacher, and they might have a tantrum, which is actually to escape attention, and everyone gets worried and wants to work out what's going on and ends up giving them more attention. So it's really important that we have a look here. Are they trying to get attention or escape attention, and tease that apart? Next, maybe it's something to do with an activity. I just got a question about if you can access this information after the webinar is over. Yes, don't feel like you have to be scribbling all this down frantically. We're moving pretty quick. There'll be a video recording of this webinar available, and we're going to send around handouts, okay? And also in future sessions, we're going to be building on this. So this won't be the first time, and sorry, the only time you hear this. We'll be going into much more depth and kind of consolidating your learning. Sorry, I didn't really finish talking about activities. So they might want to get access to a particular activity. They have a tantrum and 5 minutes later they're playing the iPad. That's one of their favorite things. Perhaps that's what's going on with the purpose. Escaping activity, maybe 5 minutes later they're no longer brushing their teeth, or they're not in bed like they were supposed to be. Maybe they're trying to escape an activity. The last one is think about sensation. This can be a little bit tricky, and that it's not always obvious what sensation your child is kind of getting out of any particular situation. And particularly if you've got a child with additional needs, you're probably aware that some kids can have issues with sensory sensitivity. But even kids who don't, they can be attracted to particular sensations, and particularly if they're stressed, that can come up as a particular issue. So maybe they want to gain a certain sensation or avoid a certain sensation, like itchy clothes or something like that. Sensations also include things like bodily needs, like thirst. If your child is thirsty, they might be kind of seeking to quench that thirst. And that would be an example of a sensation driving their behavior. All right, let's move on from that. Those are some ideas. Don't worry if you can't work it out right now. Now, like I mentioned, with the purpose, you can't be sure at this stage, but we are going to improve this guess as we go along. So like I said, it's not a one-off. You start out, you see how you're going, and you refine your information. Maybe we try something, doesn't seem to be making much difference, and we're like, well, maybe the purpose wasn't to get attention. Maybe it was something that they're really uncomfortable about in a sensory fashion. And finally, I want you to think about, is the purpose acceptable? Tantrums can cause us a lot of problems. It's not pleasant behavior. We'd probably define it as difficult behavior. But once you get underneath that to the purpose or function of the behavior, often we can find an acceptable purpose underneath. Like with the example I had of being thirsty and wanting to get a drink, if your child's nonverbal or can't help themselves to a drink, we would say that's fair enough that they're thirsty and they want a drink. So the purpose there is acceptable, but we're not so happy about the tantrum. So we differentiate between the purpose and the behavior. So unacceptable behaviors can have acceptable purposes. So just check your thinking on that as we go through. All right, folks, we can cross off number 1 here. We've done work out the purpose. That was actually the longest one tonight. I know I've been talking at you a lot. We're going to have to motor through to get through it all, but the others are shorter than that. Okay, so don't be put off if you're thinking, oh God, how are we going to get through all 6 of these? We will be getting through them quicker. Next, we've got give effective instructions. Here's some ideas on that. I'll put that over on the side. So remember how we just asked, is the purpose acceptable? That's going to influence the kind of instructions we want to give to the child. So I won't move too fast on this slide. I know there's a lot of words to take in there. On the one hand, we might say, yes, the purpose is acceptable. Then it's clear we have an opportunity there, right, folks? We have a chance to help your child achieve that purpose, but in a more suitable way than having a tantrum. On the other hand, if the purpose is not acceptable, like it's to get out of going to school, or it's to avoid contact with their sibling, we might say, look, no, that's not something that's okay. We have to get them to do that. Then we just want to direct them towards something that's generally positive or helpful. In other words, we want something to replace the behavior, the tantrum behavior, or something that they should do instead. So either way, whether the purpose is acceptable or not, we want to think of something for them to do instead. So this is where we're moving towards positives. So we're going to give an instruction to move towards a target positive behavior. Hope that makes sense. Here we go, practical tip number 2. So while we're doing this, just recognize a child can't do nothing at all. Often we fall into this trap of kind of saying stop or don't. We get really kind of animated about that, and the child, we're not kind of directing the child into something more productive. Even if it's read a book or sit still or look out the window, they're an instruction that your child can do. If you say stop or don't, your child can't cease existing. They have to do something. So think about behaviors you can direct them to instead. And that will depend a lot on your family, the situation, etc. Right, once we have a replacement behavior, then we kind of bring everything into gear and we really try and put all our effort into getting that happening. But in order to do that, we need to give our instructions in a certain way. Now, there are some features of good effective instructions that you might have heard of before. If you've heard of some ideas for good effective instructions, we're going to take a minute now. Can you share those in chat? Or look at the picture on the screen. Just describe what she's doing that you think might be helpful in terms of an effective instruction. I'll give you about 50 seconds to comment on that. Well, I just have a drink of water. Everyone's commenting. That's fantastic. Everyone's got such good ideas. I've seen some really good ones here, particularly using gestures, using contact, getting down to the child's level, using eye contact, some ideas about following through on instructions, using how you use language, keeping that simple and clear, choosing your words so that to make it like it's clearly instruction, not a negotiation, keeping calm, excellent suggestion. So I can tell that many of you are already quite well versed in giving good instructions. For those of you who are less confident about that, here are some ideas that we had. Important one is eye contact, getting down to their level, really engaging with them, using their name to get their attention, waiting until you do have their attention rather than launching straight into the comment. providing a positive consequence when they do comply. I heard labeled praise come up in the suggestions. That's an excellent one, and I'll explain what that is soon. And just do one at a time, don't overload them. Now, we're not going to do that tonight. I'll skip ahead to the next slide. So we've covered effective instructions. Next topic, provide consequences. Now, this is quite a big topic that we're not going to go into in too much detail tonight, but we will go into much more detail in future sessions. But here's some ideas. Particularly, we're interested in the positive consequences, okay? You know how we talked about that replacement behavior, that thing you want them to do instead? Have a look at some of the ideas on the notice board here. Labeled praise, we heard that before, didn't we? That's really just saying what they did that you liked and saying it in a positive way. So it would be, good job staying quiet while I was on the phone. Great job eating that broccoli. Great job staying calm while you waited your turn. So it's really about picking out the positives, and it's labeled, so it's specific. Your child knows exactly what it is that they did right. If you repeat that enough times, it becomes reinforcing. Next, attention. Your attention is actually very, very powerful. Arguably the most powerful thing you have at your disposal, either for better or for worse, by the way. You can use it really well to get better behavior out of your child by giving them positive attention, the kind of thing they like when they behave well. So if you identify a situation where they'd normally have a tantrum and they stay calm, they share, they get dressed, whatever it is that you want them to do, the good behavior that you're targeting, then you really shower on the positive attention. Labeled praise, play a game with them, give them a cuddle, watch a TV show with them. Whatever you can do where they feel that connection with you is really powerful. Next one up the top, the blue one, is use rewards. This is stuff like, you guys might have heard of reward charts, where you keep track of when your child has done the thing you want them to do, put a tick or stick on a sticker. They can see that they've done the right thing and they're building towards some sort of concrete reward. That might be a toy of some sort. It doesn't have to be big, by the way. You don't have to fork out a lot of money that you can't afford for the sake of stopping tantrums. It could be a 50-cent little toy that you got secondhand that's a little bit of plastic. It can be just as effective. Or it could be an activity like seeing a certain movie. And down the bottom we have a couple that are really more something to think about. You don't have to use these, and some people are uncomfortable about them. You can use food, so treats. I often think of it as a way of dealing with really tricky behavior and kids who are not responding the way you might hope to some of the ones up the top. Particularly if you've got a non-verbal child where they can't really pick up on the praise. You know, using food as a reward can be really powerful there. But of course, we don't want to lead to kind of setting up bad habits around eating. So use that at discretion, and if you're concerned, get some individualized advice on how to do that properly. And you might also consider letting them get out of something else that they don't really want to do. So it's kind of like not really a negotiation process, so you don't argue with them about it, but you just decide. If they do something really good, you say, you know what, you did that so well, I'm going to do whatever it is, take the bin out for you tonight. Again, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by undoing your hard work in other areas, so use that judiciously. And just a note I've put here, make sure you remove any positive consequence for the tantrum. This is where it goes back to your thinking about the purpose. If your child's getting a lot of attention for tantrums, if they're getting access to something that you're like, fine, just have it, that's a positive consequence that's going to reinforce the tantrum. So we don't want them to get anything positive as kind of a positive consequence for the tantrum. Now we're going to skip over that. Which brings us to practical tip number 3. So to really try and tip the balance towards more positive than negative behavior, I want you to really catch your child being good. almost like a detective spying on them, trying to seek out any occasion where they've done something that you want them to do and just heaping on the labeled praise and positive attention. Some psychologists use this as like their whole first line intervention. Do this for 2 weeks. Don't worry about anything else. Just catch your child out being good and heap on the positive consequences. All right, I'm going to motor along through some of this because I know we're running out of time. Let's aim for 5 more minutes on this content. Thinking long term, this is really important, guys. Well, I won't go into too much detail here because we've got a whole session on this later on. Think about what are your high risk or trigger situations, those 5-star tantrum situations, and think about strategies for them. All right, we want to really try and take the pressure off in those situations. So we might be able to make some changes that turn down the dial on that risk. Firstly, you might consider a workaround. If it's always shopping, maybe for a few weeks while they try to do this, you can do shopping online. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but it's temporary and we can come back. Or do shorter shopping trips, or remove other hurdles. Here are some other ideas. Give your child something else to do in that high-risk situation. Just an interesting activity, a toy to fiddle with. Ask them to spot everything that's red that they come across, or ask them to think about what they want to do when you get home. And choose your target behaviors that you do want, what you don't want. Set up consequences, and maybe do a practice in a lower risk situation. If phone calls are the problem, practice when you're pretending to be on the phone and coach your child through it. So like I said, this is temporary. It's not like you're never going to go to the shops again or you'll never be able to talk on the phone. It's just about, while we're starting out, we need to get more good behavior happening so that we can reinforce it and give them that positive consequences. Next, you're going to need a system to track behavior over time. Did you know that tantrums can just go up and down on their own, almost without any reason, seemingly? There's natural variation in tantrums over time. And you might notice that something a child had a tantrum about last week didn't cause them to have a tantrum this week. So this natural variation without us even doing anything different, which means we need to keep track of behavior over time so that we can tell if what we're doing is making a difference. So you're going to need to have a system, ideally some sort of written system. It doesn't have to be on a clipboard like this. It could be on notes stuck on your fridge. It could be some little note that you take on your phone. There are various options. We'll go through these in later sessions to give you some really good tips on how to use them effectively. But some ideas are, you might have heard of these, don't worry if you haven't. You could use something called a behaviour diary. You could use something called just a simple tally. Just put a mark on every time that happens. You might use an interval record, which is all about how long the tantrum lasts. Or you might come up with your own system. That's okay. The main thing is that you use it, okay? Don't set up a system that's really difficult for you to use, because you will not use it consistently. Trust me. So, practical tip number 4. You can tell we're getting to the end. Only one more practical tip to go. Have a system to track behavior over time. Put it in place. Try and use it consistently. And then check it every now and again. We'll teach you later how to look at the data to see if what you're doing is actually helping. Next, a note on describing behavior. I know I'm rushing a bit, folks. I'm sorry about that. I just want to get through this last bit so we have time for some questions. The main thing on describing behavior is just to bring a bit more detail to how we do it. This matters more than you might think. So to say something like, oh, Jim had a tantrum, or Sarah was a nightmare last night, people can probably guess what you mean, but they're going to be guessing about what that would be like with their child or a child they've already seen. It's important that we get more specific, both for your own management and targeting of the right behaviors and working with other family members or professionals. One way to do this is to use what we call the telephone test. All right? It's kind of like a little thought experiment that you can do with your describing of behaviors. So, Imagine that you're talking to a friend, describing what happened with your child's tantrum. Could that friend form a clear image in their mind of exactly what happened in that tantrum? Okay? In future sessions, we'll do some examples of this as a bit of a game. But for now, if you say, James was unbearable, he wrecked the place last night, I'd hear that and say, all right, that could mean a few different things. So when we're describing behavior, we want to use lots of good detail that makes things concrete. All right, so that will all fit together and lead into the kind of skills that we want to teach your child. So this is all about getting past the frustration and helping your child meet their needs, the purpose of the behavior, but in a more acceptable way. So basically, they fall into two categories: communication or independence. Child might have a tantrum because they want to communicate something to you and they can't. They don't have the language. Might need to introduce some sort of signing or communication aid, or another way of them getting that across to you. Or maybe they want to do something and they just can't do it and they're very frustrated, they have a tantrum. So we'll go through a process in future sessions of teaching your child new skills. Generally, showing is best. Try and do it step by step and build up over time. And you'll use a combination of verbal instructions, gesturing, and physical guiding. Too often we rely on the first of those, verbal instructions. Hey, go and do this, go and do this. Didn't you understand? Go and do this. If that doesn't work, we need more gesturing, more physical guidance, actually showing them and taking them through it step by step. So this is our final practical tip, guys. And it's just what we talked about. Teach your child these new skills. You might be able to identify some already. Maybe it's a way of getting your attention even in a productive way. Maybe you're teaching them to say your name and ask for what they want. That could be a really simple one. It gives the child a way out. It gives them a better way of doing things. And so it's really a win-win. All right, last topic is very quick. Just some ideas on using rules effectively. Again, don't worry if this doesn't make much sense on its own. We'll build on it later. Here's some tips for using rules. Firstly, don't rely on rules. I think they're overstated, their importance. They don't really change anything on their own. Think of rules as a way of helping everything else that we're doing. Second, they've got to be specific. Your child has to know exactly what they mean and exactly what the consequences are. Third, it's great if you can get your child on board, if they're old enough. Say, right, it's a problem if this happens. What do you think should be the consequences? And they might have some ideas. Maybe, I don't get to play on my iPad for 5 minutes. But ultimately, it's your decision. And finally, they've got to be applied consistently. Don't set a rule that you can't follow through on every time. If your rule is, do all your homework every night or no TV for a month, it's probably not realistic and it's actually going to be counterproductive. So there's some ideas on using rules effectively. Now, so we're finishing up the core content now. Derek's just shared a link to a survey that we're running. You don't have to do that right now. It's going to open for many of you when I end the session, if you can stick around that long. This is a way of us getting some really important feedback from you. We're still developing and improving these webinars, so we really value your feedback. That survey takes about 5 minutes to do, maybe less if you're quick, and we really do look at it. It's very important to us. So, like I said, that will open automatically at the end if you're on a computer. Here's a recap of those 5 practical tips. I won't go through them in much detail because we're fast running out of time, but first of all, create a list of the situations where the tantrums happen. Second, identify an instead behavior, what you want them to do. Third, catch your child being good. Instead of looking for their bad behavior, which sticks out, really look for their good behavior. Notice it when it happens. 4, track tantrums over time, make sense of them. 5th, teach your child new skills to get past the tantrums. Again, this will all be coming to you in a recording and in handouts, and we'll be revisiting it too. Again, here's this slide about if you're concerned. All right, we mentioned this earlier on. If you are distressed by anything that you've heard, or it's just brought up like, hey, I'm really struggling here, please do seek your own support, and there's some options there on screen. I'll bring this slide back up again just while we're going through question time. But I also want to mention next session. So next week, same time, 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Time. So if you're in a different state, you'll need to bear that in mind. We're going to have session 2, which is the first session of our second level, which is we're going to go into lots more detail about working out why your child's tantrums are happening. So the recording and handout will be available later this week. Now it is time to go. Stick around for questions if you've got time. All right. We're just going to gather some of those questions. Derek's feeding them through to me. I'm just going to have a drink of water and have a look at those, and we'll have a chat. All right. I'll put this slide back on screen with further support. So I'm still here. I'm going to stop talking for about 30 seconds and then I'll be back. Don't think something's gone wrong. All right, folks, let's go through some of these questions. We've got a good number of you participating tonight, so we won't get through all of them. I'm sorry about that. We were prepared for that, and that's why we've scheduled all these future sessions. And certainly level 3 is going to be much more discussion based, so there'll be much more chance to ask lengthier questions and go into more detail about your particular circumstances. So tonight we've just got a bunch of questions that we're going to go through that we think are going to be relevant to a fair number of people. Again, I'm sorry if we don't get to yours. I encourage you to come back again in the future. It's just due to the number of people that we have, but and that we also didn't really intend this to be as in-depth as future sessions will be. So a few people have asked about what will happen if you can't make it in the future to webinars. So we very much understand that it can be hard. Things come up. Your child doesn't go to sleep when you thought they would. Life gets in the way and you can't attend a live webinar at a particular time. That's okay. We want to accommodate that as much as possible. We do think the live webinar is the best experience, but you'll keep getting the links to the recordings as we go through. On that note, I'm going to when we send out the handout, there'll also be activities between sessions. Obviously, listening to these webinars, listening to me talk, isn't going to change that much. You're going to have to do something different, which is hard. I'm not trying to make that sound like it's a trivial thing, but I want to support you to actually start making changes. So yes, you will still have access to all the content in recorded form. Isabella had a question about a son in daycare who spends time with grandma as well and trying to achieve consistency with other carers. This is an excellent question, one that we go through in detail later on. I could go back to one of the slides, but I won't bother going back to that now. about, you know how we talked about describing behavior and using detail? We'll also go into more about how to communicate about behavior with relatives, other carers, okay? So my tips are be really specific about exactly what the behavior is that you're targeting and exactly what the replacement behavior is. Maybe share with grandma, you could easily share these videos, the recordings, if she's interested and has time to watch them, so she knows what you're on about and why you're hoping it'll work and trying to make a difference. So definitely encourage grandma to, well, you need to support grandma to understand what it is you're trying to do and what you're targeting, okay? So I can't go through too much more detail about what to do on that one now, but it's all about concrete communication with grandma. Nikki had a question about what if it escalates? Is it still a tantrum if it becomes question about what if it escalates? Is it still a tantrum if it becomes anger/rage? And here, Nikki, I'm imagining things getting broken, hitting, yelling, child kind of who's lost control and isn't really able to regulate themselves anymore. A few things to consider here. In this course, we're not really covering if your child has something else going on like anxiety, like particular communication problems. The approach will probably still work for them, and it has been applied with those kids, but you may want to consider getting additional support to target that particular issue. So yes, we would still consider that a tantrum. We would see that as part of the tantrum episode, and you would build this into your description of the behavior. So when we talk about tracking it, you might want to use something like an interval record, which tracks how severe it is and how long it lasts for, or otherwise have a way of quantifying that. And in those situations, it's really just don't try and reason with the child. I think in later sessions, we'll talk about how often parents fall into a trap really wanting the child to understand. It's really frustrating that they don't get that this is not on, right? That this behavior is not going to get them what they want. Put that aside. It really, in the moment, it's kind of too late trying to talk them out of it. Make them safe, try and de-escalate, distract them with something else, do what you need to do to calm them down, and then work on it in the long term. Despina had a comment about a high-risk situation to do with siblings, and that's usually the trigger and kind of fighting over toys or something like that. That's very common. To minimize that, again, I would say we're going to focus on really having good quality replacement behaviors. So something that you want them to do instead. So if you don't want them to snatch or you don't want them to have a tantrum and they can't have what they want, give them kind of an expectation that they can have what they want if they do things the way they should be done. So teaching them about things like waiting turns, teaching them about things like reasonable expectations for how much they might play with a particular toy, encouraging them to enjoy other toys as well, working with the sibling to also understand how much needs to be shared. Can be slow progress with a really young child. There's a developmental aspect to this too. You might need to use some diversion for a while, but generally focus on what is the positive that you want to reinforce. We've got a question about example scenarios. Sybil in particular was interested in that. We won't go through a whole example now. In future, we're going to have kind of case vignettes where I'll explain kind of with, I can't talk about particular clients that I've worked with due to confidentiality, but we can talk about sort of case vignettes of examples, and we'll work through them as we go along. So there'll be more of that in future sessions, but it takes some time. Candace had a point about food rewards creating a bad relationship with food. Definitely that's a risk, definitely a valid point. So it's kind of weighing up those risks in your mind. How much of a risk is this ongoing tantrum or other bad behavior versus how much of a risk is the bad relationship with food? That's why I said, you might want to use it for particularly bad behavior. It's just an option. So don't, if you're uncomfortable with it, don't do it. I mean, don't push yourself to do something that doesn't make sense to you. You've got to be confident about it. So it would be really in a case where, all right, there's a risk of a bad relationship with food, but gee, these tantrums are, you know, I can't take them to school, I can't take them to socialize with other kids, they're getting worse, I'm worried about their ability to participate in society, you know, where it's kind of the lesser of two evils, so a trade-off situation. But that's definitely a valid concern about the relationship with food. Concern about before playtime, it's kind of briefing kids. I think Nikki B is making a point here about preparing kids for expectations, right? So setting up consequences and expectations before what might be a high-risk situation. In Nikki's case, it sounds like that's playtime, maybe sibling or other kids are there. That is definitely a good idea. So you know how we talked about giving effective instructions and also setting household rules? This is something we want to do ahead of time. Exactly. I would say that's a definition of a rule. You do it ahead of time, set clear expectations. While you're participating with a course or, you know, working with a professional, anytime you decide you want to change something about your child's behavior and you're really going to have a crack at it, I often say to parents, let's do a reset. Let's kind of take stock and start again with things like rules and expectations. It's a great opportunity to spell out to your children exactly what the expectations are and make it, like we said, make it concrete and make it clear what the consequences are. So it's almost out of your hands by that stage. You can say, sorry, I don't want to put these consequences in place. You know, I don't want to take away that thing that you really want to play with, but we know what the rules are, so we've got to do it. So that's a great idea, Nikki, and definitely that can be very effective. All right, so I think that's really all we've got time to. Sorry, time to cover. Just a quick comment or question there from James about treats or threats on everything. Certainly you want to be consistent. So consistency is very important. I think I mentioned that and we'll definitely reinforce that in future webinars. So yes, you want to say for at least 90% of the time a behavior happens that you follow through on the consequence. But threats are to be avoided. And by threat, I mean sort of an empty threat. It's like, if you don't do this, there's going to be something really serious and then you can't really follow through. You just want it to be calm and like clear what the expectations are. All right. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We've gone a bit over the hour. Thank you for sticking around for everyone who has. Remember, there is more sessions to come, and this on its own, we've got some practical tips that we've given you. I wouldn't expect that to make a huge amount of difference. You really need, like, even 7 sessions, we're really working hard to cram a lot of content in there. So try and come to as many sessions as you can. They're going to be every week at 7:30 p.m. You'll get a new link via email. So don't follow the link from the old email. Watch your email. Everything will come through there. You'll get a new link for next week. All right, so I'm going to end the webinar now, and don't close your browser. You should see the survey come up and load automatically. All right, have a great evening. Talk to you in the near future.